Welcome to Live DAF, your online DAF Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's DAF, Bava Kamma Lamed Vav. We are holding two lines off the top of the Amud. Hoyu Shneim Shalish Echad Shneim Chayav. Back to the Mishnah. We have a fellow who owns two bulls. They're both chasing. There's a chase, 2 against 1. They're chasing Shimon's animal. And one of these attacked Shimon's animal. We're not sure which one. So the halacha is, if both animals belong to Reuven, which they do in this case, so they're chayiv. Now we're speaking, at this point we figure that the case is discussing animals, bulls who are in a tam stage, right? So the halacha is that tam is mishalim only migufay. You can only extract payment from the actual animal. So if the animal goes missing, you have no recourse. The owner does not have to pay from his own pocket. Now the Mishnah seems to say that even if we're not sure, we're not certain, we're not positive which one attacked, but since both of them belong to the same person, you have a right to collect. Why? So let's say one goes missing. Maybe that's the one that attacked, and you're gone. You have no claim. Amalei Rava miparziko. He asked the kasha l'Ravashi. Shemamina, do you mean to say shvarim tamim sheziku? 2 animals who are in a tam stage, who amongst both of them there was one attacker. We're not sure which one. So you have a choice. You can just pick and choose which one to take from. Why? Ratza mizegava, you could take from this one if you want. Ratza, if he wishes, mizegava, take from the other one. Why do you say ratza mizegava, ratza mizegava, if you don't know which one it is? No, the Mishnah is speaking b'mu'adan. This fellow owns 2 animals who are in a muad state. Forget about migufa, he has to pay from his own pocket. So, either way, he's chayav, whether it was this one or that one. Well, even mu'adan, if that's the case of the Mishnah, let's move on to the next case. So, we have 2 animals chasing. Now, one of these is a large, expensive, valuable animal from which you can draw a lot of, pay. The other one is a small one, a mini animal. Very low payout potential. Now, there's a disagreement between the mazik and the nizik, right? Hanizik omer, the one that his animal was attacked, he claims, gadol hizik. It was the big one, the valuable one that did the damage, so I have potential for a large payout. Migufa, right? Mazik omer, the mazik says, no, like it. Actually, not El Katan hizik was a small one. So you're limited by the value of that small animal. What is the halacha? The one who's trying to extract money, in this case the nizak, all of a right, he has to prove his case. Now, even mu'adin, if we're speaking that these animals are mu'ad, who cares? Gadol, cotton, valuable, less valuable. In any case, the owner pays from his pocket. My nafkale minute, what's the difference? So ultimately made hiram al yibayishlim. You got to pay the full value of the animal that was killed. Amalisi responded, you're right, Seifa b'tamin. Although the most recent case in the Mishnah clearly speaks about tamin, because the migufa factor is at play, but the ratio, which indicates that when there's an uncertainty as to which animal attacked, you have to pay either way, because they're mu'adin, in which case you pay from your pocket regardless. Amali Rab, Acha Saval Ravashi. Well, if the ratio is speaking that they're mu'ad, chayavim, why do we say they are responsible? Meaning, forget about the animals. You're not taking from the animal, you're taking from the owner. Chayav gabra, we should speak about the owner paying. Vasu another kasha, they're both responsible? He pays. What do you mean they have to pay? Let's go back to the first, initial understanding of the Mishnah that it's all about animals in a tam state. Question. If we're not sure which one attacked, how could you collect? The case of the Mishnah actually is where both animals are present, and they have to both be present. Otherwise, you have no way to collect your claim. Why? Because we're following Rabbi Kiva, who says that when an animal attacks the victim, now assumes partial ownership. In the case of a tam, he gets the chatzi, he gets chatzi nezek stake within the animal. So he becomes like a half owner. They become shutfin, the mazik, and then they become partners. And therefore, when the animal goes missing, you lost your case. It's over. Because your claim can only be actualized by collecting on the mazik's animal. And therefore, the Mishnah is exactly pointing out that point. V'tamad is no tarvayu. It's the only way the nizak can collect anything is where both animals are alive and present. So the mazik cannot push him away and say, well, it was the other one that got lost, and you lost your deal. Ava listen to tavai, but if they're not both here, only one is here, matzi amarle, so the mazik can tell him, look, zil isi raya, the high Torah, askach, please prove that this animal is actually the one that harmed you. I'll pay you. Maybe it was the other one, and you already assumed partial ownership on that one, and it's gone, so you lost your claim. So that's all the Mishnah is saying. When they're both here, shneim chayav, then you have to pay. If they're not both here, then how can you collect? Whereas according to Rabbi Shmuel points out Rashi, according to Rabbi Shmuel, you don't assume ownership of the attacker. You have a monetary claim. So even if one of these animals goes missing, you can still collect from the other one, because he still owes you money. It's true. It's migufa, meaning you can't. Your claim cannot exceed. It's capped by the value of the attacker, but ultimately, if the attacker is not here, you can still take from the owner's own money. Continues the Mishnah. Imagine a shur went on a rampage. He attacks one shur and another one, 4 or 5, one after the other. So who gets first priority? We're speaking about a shur tam. Now, how could an animal be attacking so many times and still be considered a shur tam? So Rashi says we're speaking of a strange case where, he attacked and he refrained from attacking. He attacked again, in a random pattern. So he hasn't really established himself because he wasn't doing it in a succession or in an established pattern. So he's not a mu'ad. He's still only paying chatzir. The question is, who gets priority? There's only so much to pay. There's only so much value that the animal has, right? So who gets first? Yishalom la'achar shebehem. It's the last one, the most recent fellow, gets his chatzir nezek first. Now, if there's some more remaining in the animal, v'imyesh by moisar, there's more to go. Yachzer l'shalafanav. So you should pay the fellow who was second to last. V'imyesh by moisar, there's even more left over. Yachzer l'shalafnefanav. It goes to the one before that guy. So ultimately, va'achar and achar niskar, it's the last, most recent victim that ends up getting, he gets priority. Divir Rameir Shita, the Gemara of course will explain why. Rabbi Shimon Omer, no, it doesn't work like that. There's a very exact a formula in terms of what each fellow gets. As follows: Shor Shavim Masayim. So we start with an animal worth 200. Shenogach l'Shor Shavim Masayim, who attacked another animal worth 200. Ve'ena nevela for klum, the nevela is worthless. So the damage total 200. Shor Tam will pay 100. So Reuven's animal attacked Shimon. He owes him 100. The animal's worth 200. So they sort of become partners. This is going like a Rabbi Akiva. They become partners in the animal. Zeno etel mana, Zeno etel mana. Reuven and Shimon both split the animal. So Shimon sort of becomes an owner, a partial owner. So now he's responsible for any subsequent attacks that this animal perpetuates. Right? So now he goes and attacks Levi's animal, who's also worth 200. So firstly, Levi gets his 100, half of his damage. Why not? He's entitled to 50%. Because his animal didn't attack anybody. He's a victim. Shalafanav, but the two fellows who precede Levi, meaning Reuben and Shimon, see, they're responsible for Levi's damage because they're owners of this animal. So each one they have to split the damage between themselves. So the payout was 100, so each fellow has to contribute 50. Now initially he was going to get 100 each, right? Reuben and Shimon, each one was going to get 100, so now it's 50 each. He gets 50, he gets 50. Now the same idea will happen if there's another step in the story. Same concept. The animal went further and attacked another one, worth 200. So once again, the last fellow, he gets his chatzi nezek, fair and square. The fellow that preceded him, he was going to get 100, but now that his quote-unquote animal, the animal in which he had a stake in, partial ownership in this animal, so the animal attacks, he's responsible for this attack. At least half of the amount he'll have to pay out because he was half owner, right? He had a 50% stake in this animal, so he has to pay 50% of the damage. Now the chatzi nezek is 100, so he has to pay half of that, which is 50. So his share now goes down from 100 to 50. Now the first two fellows, Reuben and Shimon, dinar zav amounts to 25 dinar kesef, so they only get 25. So they started with 200, right? Then when Reuben started with 200, now when his animal attacked the first time, he lost 100. When his animal attacked the next time, he went down to 250. And now the next time he goes down 25, right? Makes sense. So each time he loses half of his stake in that animal. Because basically he's responsible in proportion to his share in the animal. Right? If you're a full owner, you're fully responsible. If you're a half owner, half responsible. If you're a quarter owner, quarter responsible. So this fellow's share kept on changing. Initially he was a full owner, so he had to pay full chatzi nezek. Then he sort of became a partner in the animal. He only owns it halfway. So now next time it attacks, he only pays half of that. Now he's only a quarter owner. So next time it attacks, he only pays a quarter. Okay, so we have a mayor who says, well, no, it's the last fellow who gets everything. Anything left over, okay, it goes to the previous guy, and so on and so forth. Rabbi Shimon says, no, we follow a very specific, exact formula, and Rashi explains it's based on the concept of partnership, of par ownership, which happens when you're a victim of the animal's attack. You become sort of an owner of the animal. And that's in line with Rabbi Kiva's Shita, who says, Shutvinin, who says, Yuchlat Asher, it's granted to the victim, at least partially, in proportion to his claim. Okay, now Masnisin and Mani. Let's go back to the first part of the Mishnah. Sure was Niyach 4 or 5 times. First priority is the last fellow. Next comes the fellow before him, etc. Who's speaking in this Mishnah? Loi, Mani, Loi, the like Rabbi Shmuel, like Rabbi Kiva, can't be following not Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Kiva. Why? Ikar Rabbi Shmuel, the Amar Balachavis Ninu, according to Rabbi Shmuel. When you're attacked, you have a financial claim. You don't become an owner in the actual animal. So then, why do we say, Hi, Achor and Achor Niskar? Why do we say the last fellow gains? If anything, he's on the bottom of the list. He's the last rung on the ladder. Rishon Niskar Mebayle, who had the first claim on this animal? The first victim. So he gets first priority, not the last one. So according to Rishmol, this halacha will not hold any water. Ikar Rabbi Kiva, according to Rabbi Kiva, who has a different approach. The Amar Torah the shut for you that a fellow whose animal was attacked, the victim has now assumes a stake, a financial stake, a part ownership in the animal. So why does the Mishnah say, Hi, yesh by Maisar yachs shalafanav? So I understand that the last fellow, he gets his Chatzi Nezek, fair and square, because his so-called animal didn't do anything. He only got involved after all the attacks, so he's not responsible. But that's fine. But the Mishnah continues and says, well, if there's anything left over, if the value of the animal exceeds the Chatzi Nezek given to the last one, Yachzor Shel Lefanav. So that is forwarded to the second to the last fellow. Why? It should be divided equally amongst all the so-called owners. They all lose a part of the in proportion to their part of the animal, who is mazik, for which they carry responsibility. So you should make sort of that division, divided based on that formula. We shouldn't say, well, it all goes to the last fellow, next to the second to the last, next. No. The last fellow is not responsible. Nothing happened under his watch, but everybody else is sort of responsible based on their proportional stake in the animal, right? So they should all get something. You're right. It can't work like Rabbi Akiva. We're going like Rabbi Shmuel that a nizik is just a bal chayiv. The Omer bal chayiv is niner, right? But the kashilach. What about your question? What you asked? Achron niska. Why do we say the last fellow gains? Rishon niska mebayir. The first fellow, who's the first bal chayiv, he has the biggest stake of all. Hachav ma'iskin. We're speaking about a special case. You're going to shetaf say nizik. Lig by say menu. You're right. Shimon, the first victim, didn't just take it in stride. He actually turned around and grabbed the animal. He grabbed the animal, Ligbay Semeno, to use it to collect his claim. Now, he becomes a shomer sachar. He becomes responsible for the animal now that he's sort of holding on to it. It's in his jurisdiction. Just like when you deposit your animal, you give somebody an animal to watch, you pay him for it. He has to look after it. He's responsible. It's in his jurisdiction. So when you grab an animal for the sake of collection, you're gaining from it. There's some gain inherent in that transaction. So you become a shemer sachar. You're responsible for any damages that this animal causes. So now we fully understand why Shimon and Levi and whatever, all these fellows who grab the animal to collect from it are responsible, and they're not entitled anymore to collect from this animal if this animal caused further damage. So only the last one on the list who had no such experience, he's just a victim, he never grabbed the animal, never had anything under his watch, he's fully entitled to his Chatzi Nezek. But not everybody else. Well, if that's the case, I understand, but then Yesh by Meiser Yachzor Shel Lefanav. Raisa says, well, the Mishnah says if there's anything left over after the last fellow collects, he's a rightful collector. But anything left over goes to the second to the last person. No, he lost his share because his animal damaged, his animal attacked under his watch. The only one that still has any right to take from it is the owner, the first owner, the real owner, Reuben, who was no longer in charge of his animal after it was grabbed by the other fellows. So if there's anything left over, he should get it, not the other. Amar Avinu Chikotani. Mishnah means like this. You're right, but this is how we learned the Mishnah. Im yesh by Moshe ben Zakav Yachzor Shel Lefanav. Means like this. That if the amount of damages being claimed by the third fellow on the list is greater in number than the claim presented by the fifth guy, let's say. So the fifth fellow, the last one on the list, of course he gets first, like we said, because nothing happened under his watch, he's fully entitled, but he's not going to take everything, right? Right? If there's some left over, and the fellow that preceded him, he experienced a greater amount of damage, so he has a right to collect that extra. Okay, so that's what the Mishnah means. The fourth fellow had a $50 claim, but the fifth fellow was only asking for $40. So true, number 4 owes number 5 for these damages, but it's only $40, so he gets that extra $10 because he only lost 40 from his claim, so he's entitled to 10 extra. That's all the Mishnah means. But of course, the rest of the money goes back to the original owner, Reuben, who carries no responsibility for all these episodes. It wasn't even under his jurisdiction. So the kasha was what we thought, that number 5 gets what he deserves. Anything left over goes to number 4, and so on and so forth. Why? Number 4 lost. Should lose, should deduct whatever goes to number 5, because that happened under number 4's watch. He's responsible for it. You're right. But let's say number 5 is not asking as much as number 4, so sure, he deducts. Number 4 has to deduct whatever goes to number 5 from his entitlement, but if there's any balance, he gets that. But anything beyond that, of course, goes to the original owner. Okay, so, and this idea can work with fellow number 2, number 3, number 4, just picking on 4 and 5. But the point is that, of course, if something happens under your watch, you lose. You have to pay for it. But let's say that amount is less than your original claim, so that balance you can still take. But only that much, because you have to give up the amount that you have to pay to the next fellow, because that happened under your watch. You're responsible for that. Okay, but if there's anything beyond all this, any amount beyond all that, of course, that goes back to the owner. So Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, he interpreted the Mishnah the same way. Rabbi Yehuda, he quotes Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Why do we say that the earlier fellows lose out? A Baal Chayiv, who comes first, should get first, according to Rabbi Shmuel. The answer is because it was under his watch, he's responsible. Misham Pshias Shemer Nagaba. It's based on the concept that a Shemer is responsible, and any negligence, any carelessness incurs liability. So now, B'mayu Kimta, Rabbi Shmuel. So we've established the first part of the Mishnah works strictly with Rabbi Shmuel. The Mazak, the Nizak, they don't become stakeholders in the animal. They're not shutfin. They're simply Bali Chayv. The person is a Bal Chayv. And really the first Bal Chayv is entitled to priority. But the fact is, since the attack happened under his watch, because we're speaking that he was Taifas the animal, so he's responsible in as much as the victim is claiming. Fine? If that's the case, Emos safe. Where does the Mishnah continue and says, Rabbi Shimon says, a 200 animal hit a 200 animal, the Nevel is worthless, so it's total loss. So Reuben, the owner, and Shimon, the animal, the attacked animal's owner, each one gets 100 out of the animal. The animal continued and attacked another shar worth 200. So the most recent owner gets his chatzi nezek 100. But Reuben and Shimon, who are before the last fellow, they have to split this loss. Each one goes down from 100 to 50. Right, and continues, and he hits another animal, same story. So they all lose proportionate to their stake in the animal. So the last fellow gets his chatzi nezek, it's full $100. Shalafanov, and the fellow before him, he was already a half owner in the animal, so he's responsible for half this payout. So he goes from 100 to 50, he loses 50. And the first two fellows, who at this point only had $50, which is a quarter of the animal. So as a result of this new attack, they lose half of that. They lose 25 out of their 50 that they had. okay, because they were each one only had a quarter ownership in the animal at this point, right? Because Levi had 50%, the Reuben and Shimon only had a quarter at this point. So they have to pay a quarter of the damages. Damages is 100, so a quarter is 25. So they go down from their 50 to 25. They lose 25. So bottom line is, this concept that you lose in proportion to your ownership is Rabbi Kiva's type of concept. Asan Rabbi Kiva, the Amar Torah, the Shut for you. The Mazik, the Nizik assume partnership. They assume partial ownership in the animal, and they are responsible accordingly. So now, Reisha Rishmo. The first part of the Mishnah we said is Rabbi Shmuel. We say for Rabbi Kiva. The next part is Rabbi Kiva. Amr, yeah. So I said, yeah, incorrect. The Ha'amr li Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel already told Rabbi Yehuda, Shimna, he used to call him sharp one. Shvoik mas nissen. Stop trying to reconcile the entire Mishnah like one opinion. V'tav basroi, follow me. Sometimes you have to do that. Inevitable. Reisha Rabbi Shmuel, say Rabbi Kiva. First part reflects Rabbi Shmuel, and the second part Rabbi Kiva. Continues the Gemara. Tanan also, we have a Mishnah. Tekel chaveru. Person blows into his friend's ear and embarrasses him. Noisin le'sela, gives him a sela as compensation. Baishes, for embarrassment. Rabbi Yehuda Omer B'Shem Rabbi Yisak Lili, Mana, he gets 100 dinar. How Gavra? It was this fellow, the Takal Chavrei. He did this to his friend. Shalchi Rav Tuvia bar Masna. So Rav Tuvia asked the question of Kamei de Rav Yosef. When the Mishnah says you give a sela, there's two types of currencies that I could be speaking about. Sela Tzuri Tanan, is it the one from Tzur, from Tyre, real valuable coin? Or is Sela Medina Tanan? Or is it the commonly used Sela, which is actually an eighth of a Sela Tzuri? What did the Chacham have in mind when they spoke about a Sela in the Mishnah? A Sela Medina Tanan. Armali Tanisua, I want to bring you a right from the Mishnah Bava Kamma. That when the Chacham speak about currencies, it's about the higher, more valuable currencies, the Tzur currencies. We have the Mishnah where we break it down and they lose their portion. Ushnaim Rishon Dinar Zav. The first two fellows walk away with a dinar. Dinar is 25. Dinar Zav is 25 dinar kesef. Okay, that's the last case of the Mishnah, right? That's sort of the smallest denomination that we speak of in our Mishnah. Smallest amount you can walk away with is a dinar zav. Now, Bisa Gadayel Tana, Sela Medina, if it's true that a Tana and a Mishnah will discuss the currencies of lower value as well, so why do we have to stop? Why the last example is smallest payout is a dinar zav. Why? Nifloig, Finisni Atresar Vesela. Why don't we go down to even further? That, let's say the animal attacked once again, right? So this is sort of another step in the story. So these fellows who had a dinar zav, which is 25 dinar of kesef, stake in the animal, they now lose half of that. They go down to 12 dinar, right? So dinar zav we said is 25 dinar kesef, and half of that is 12 dinar kesef and a half, right? 12 and a half. 12 and a sela. Sela medina, Rashi says, is a half of a dinar in the Tzuri currency. So we could get to 12 and a half if in fact we discuss the Medina currencies, because a sela medina will be a half of a dinar in the Tzuri currency. So you can get to the point of 12 and a half. Apparently there's no half dinar in the Tzuri currency, but if you can somehow incorporate the Medina currency, you can get to 12 and a half. 12 dinar Tzuri and a sela Medina, which equals a half a sela Tzuri. Amr Lacey says, no, don't raya. Tana ki roichla, listen to Lezel. You think the Tana has to go peddling around like a peddler and peddling his wares and go through every single scenario, every single case? Perhaps the Mishnah will speak about Medina currencies, but up to a point. We discussed the animal hitting once and again and again. We stop at a certain point. Don't draw any conclusions. So the question is, how much do you pay for embarrassing somebody? Tekel chaver, you give a sela. What type of sela? Medina or tzuri. Pashtu amad amar Yehuda Marab. So the Chachamim responded with a raya from Yehuda Marab. Call kesef amar b'Torah, when you have the word kesef in the Torah, and Torah speaks about currencies, kesef tzuri speaks about the currency of higher value. Shall devrayim kesef Medina. But when money is discussed in the Mishnayos, and right, Shira the Rabbanon, we speak about the lower value currency, the Kesef Medina, which is really an eighth of the Kesef Tzuri. Amalei Gavra. So let's go back to the story of this fellow who yelled into his friend's ear, right? So now he owed him a Kesef Medina, which is very little. So Amalei Gavra, so the victim said, look, it's only half of zuz. Sel Medina is a half of zuz of tzuri. It's very little. It's embarrassing for me to even take it. I was embarrassed once. I don't want to be embarrassed again. Look, but I don't need it. Let him give it to the tzedakah. That's what he said initially. But then he changed his mind. Then he said, let him give it to me. I want to go buy himself something to eat. Rav Yisrael says, you can't do that. Too late. No backing out. You already donated it to tzedakah. Kvar zocha beyanim. The poor people already zocha. Your commitment is final. Even though we don't have aniyim hacha right here, nobody accepted it from you. Anan yad aniyim anan. We represent the aniyim. Rashi actually says that Rav Yosef was a gabi tzedakah, so we sort of took it for them. We accepted your donation for them. You can't go back on it. Amar Vidam Shmuel Yisayim Einon. In a similar fashion, Rav Vidam Shmuel says, by Yisayim orphans Einon tzricham pruzbol. Typically, when you write a pruzbol, that document which allows you to collect your loan after the Shemitah, because you're sort of giving it over to the Bezdin, they're collecting it. Yisayim don't have to go through the bother of writing a pruzbol. You know why? Because Bezdin is sort of caretaking for them. It's as though they wrote a pruzbol. Likewise, Rabbi Kamma taught us, you know why Rabbi Gamliel obeys Dinai? The great Bezdin, Rabbi Gamliel, they are the caretakers. Avian shall Yisayim Hoy, they're like the father. They take care of the Yisayim, and they don't have to go through the formal, procedure of giving it to Bezdin to collect. Bezdin is automatically caretaking for them. So same thing with the aniyim, says the Gemara, we look after the aniyim. You donated it, we accepted the donation, it's done. Chanan Bisha, there was a fellow called Chanan Bisha, wasn't such a pleasant fellow. Takule al Gavra. So he blew into his other friend's fellow's ear and he embarrassed him. Also like Rav Huna. So they came to Rav Huna for Dintera Amar Leis. Rav Huna tells him, pay up. Zil Havli Palga Zuzah, give him half the coin. Havli Zuzah Makkah. So yeah, this Chanan has this rubbed out coin. So he wanted to get some change and give him, half of it. Somebody wanted to, exchange it for him in the market. It was a rubbed out coin. So he wasn't going to give him a full coin. He couldn't forget him, right? So he gave him another tekiah. Now he owed him a full coin. And gave him a full coin. And told him to keep the change. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the DAF. We have the halacha of a muad, which according to a tam, which according to Rabbi Kiva, the victim becomes a shutaf, whereas according to Rabbi Shmuel, he's only a bal chayv. And that takes us into the next Mishnah. A shut that was negech many times over. Again, we have these two tracks, Rabbi Shmuel's track, that each fellow is just a bal chayv. So really the first bal chayv is entitled to priority, but we're speaking that he took possession of the animal, therefore he's responsible for any subsequent damages in proportion to his financial stake in the animal. Whereas according to Rabbi Kiva, which is reflected in the Shita of Rabbi Shimon and the Seifa, it's all about shutfim and actual ownership, and therefore whatever happens, you're responsible. Sorry, let's go back a second. According to Rabbi Shmuel, we're speaking that they were taifes, they assumed possession of the animal as per collection of their claim, and therefore you're like a shemus sacha, and you're fully responsible, not in proportion to your stake. You're fully responsible for anything that happens under your watch, and that's how he explains the Mishnah. And therefore, the last fellow is the one that gets the most, followed by the fellow before. If in fact the amount owing to the last fellow is less than the amount owing to the fellow beforehand, but of course, he has to deduct whatever is going to be going to the last fellow because he's responsible for that. And anything left beyond goes to the owner. Whereas according to Rabbi Akiva, it's all about, shutfim. They're all shutfim. All these fellows are equal shutfim, actually unequal shutfim, because as the animal keeps on attacking, the earlier fellows, lose more and more and more. So basically, whatever amount you have in the animal right now, that's how much you get, you collect ultimately. So that's the Mishnah. And then we went on to the halacha of boishes. And we had an example of a tekei al chaveri. He gives him a sela, which we concluded means sela medina. This fellow was at a change, and he arranged to give him a full sela change included. All the best to you, and Hatzlacha Rabbah.